Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Modern Maze. Thank you for joining me here once again. I know that it's been a little while since we last spoke, but I hope that everybody's doing well and everybody's safe and sound and looking after yourselves as always. It's been a pretty hectic time for me these last couple of months. Look, I knew I was going to be busy once I started this podcast on top of a full-time job and all my other commitments, but I don't think I was ready for this still. It it's taken a lot to just try and get one episode out at a time, and so I've really had to slow myself down and take some time, not rush it for the sake of rushing it. Because I've just been extremely busy, but I've been wanting to get this particular episode out for a long time. And this idea really came to me about 3 weeks ago, I think. Initially, I was going to follow on the last episode, which was all about the beginnings of capitalism. And I was going to talk about colonization and artificial scarcity. But I had a few moments of reflection during a festival that I went to, and it was one of those 3-day camping ones out in the bush. And the thing that I really love about festivals, well, one of the things is that it gives me a break that I just never seem to get in my normal day-to-day life, regardless of if it's a weekend. And it almost gives me a little bit of that clarity that I get when I travel, like a little pinch of it. So I find that there'll be a moment, it'll just happen where I just step out of my body and my mind, and I really get to reflect what I've been feeling. A lot of things come up for me during those times. It will be brief, but quite intense because I feel everything catching up to me and me trying to process that. And so during this festival, there was a moment, and it came again, where I had a reflection. And immediately when I was with the trees and had gone on a little walk outside of the festival, and within a few minutes of just being still amongst the trees, I began to feel this heavy sort of burden on my body and my mind. And I just felt heavy. I felt like I've been quite mentally and physically exhausted. And I know that's because of a lot of things right now, because life is just really, really busy. And I'm going to be doing some things to try and cut back on some commitments and take some more time for myself. But one of the things that really came to the front of my mind was the realization that ever since I started this podcast, and actually ever since I began planning this podcast, which was back in December, I've really been in the news of what is going wrong in the world, or what are the issues. And while that is all important stuff and it helps me create this platform and talk about these things, I realize that I've been spending so much time in what's going wrong and how to fix it that I was actually mentally exhausting myself and putting the whole weight of the world upon my shoulders. So I walked out of that festival with that little nugget in my head, and I said to myself, you know what? The history of capitalism can wait. I feel like I surely cannot be the only one who feels like there's a lot going on in the world right now. And specifically for me, that comes from consuming media. And oftentimes, the negative news that I consume happens sort of unintentionally, or maybe I look for one article, I just want to stay informed on something, And then before I know it, it's half an hour in and I've gone through 10 articles and reels, and I leave that haze of just that news cycle, just feeling anxious and run down and worried about the world. And I think this negative news cycle, my hypothesis is that a lot of people feel this. And that's what I was thinking when I walked out of that festival. And so I wanted to talk about it because I think it's quite interesting. And I also want to begin bringing positive news out there. And I said this in my introduction episode, but I do want to also highlight on this podcast all of the amazing things that are going on, because there are a lot of incredible things going on. And I also want to bring people on who are doing all of these incredible things. And so it seemed like a good time. Just switch up the episodes a bit, bring a bit of good news, but first, just talk about this negative news cycle and why does it seem to happen? What are some of the reasons? And so with all of that being said, let's talk about it. So have you had a time this year when you were doom scrolling? And this is an actual term. And this is when you stumble across one negative story and then just begin to consume more and more of that type of news or articles. As I was saying before, I have many times this year gone through that doom scrolling. And this term really emerged in the start of 2020. And it's used to describe a digital media consumption mode that we go into. And it really happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, or it was exacerbated. Doom scrolling specifically refers to a state of media use that is categorized as people scrolling through their social media news feeds, and there's an obsessive focus on distressing, depressing, or otherwise negative news. So doom scrolling, much like when you passively use social media, has been described as immersive, and it can lead to lengthy browsing sessions and lost time awareness. And doom scrolling may not be, just from COVID-19, but it is really related, and it's almost a habit that has been formed in response to how global and local crises unfold. The strong connection anyways to social media addiction and, our problematic internet use can suggest that doom scrolling is an excessive form of this behavior. Now, some of the studied consequences can include increased anxiety, a sense of helplessness, and a distorted perception of risk and negativity in the world. Now, I can relate with those negative effects because I have felt all of that throughout my various doom scrolling adventures, especially with the conflicts going on in the world, Gaza and Ukraine. I've particularly found myself quite attached to those stories. Something interesting to point out is that with the availability of news on our smartphones, news has never been so close to all of us 24/7. Like, before this, it was the internet. Before that, it was newspapers and radio. And while there was a 24/7 news cycle, it's really hard to get yourself immersed in that. Now it's in my pocket. Now it's with me at work when I work on my laptop all day. Like I find myself just Googling the conflicts at least once a day when I'm at work because I'm on a laptop, and then eventually it's like a habit. It just happens. And this is the first time in human history where we can, one, have so much news content, and then two, something particularly distressing that I've seen is, like on the ground footage of wars. And that particularly grips me. Whenever one of these conflicts begin, like, yeah, those videos get shared and that really grips me and, yeah, takes a hold of me. And this isn't something that our brains are used to, right? Like, our brains have never had to deal with the imagery and sounds of a war on the ground from maybe a phone. So it's in a POV mode and experiencing all of that while on our couch back home. And like, this is really recent that this has happened in terms of all this footage and the availability of news. I think sometimes we give our brains too much credit for being able to adapt so fast. But like, evolutionarily speaking, how many years has this been going on for, right? Like, I'm sure maybe one day we're going to adapt to it, but we're definitely not ready for this. And I can speak for myself that when I watch these videos or I consume this news, like, I can feel the effect on me. Like, I feel myself tense up, my palms get sweaty, my focus and my vision like narrows, and it's just really recent for all of this. And so I don't think our brains and bodies were meant to take all of this on. It's a big jump from how media and news used to be before, or what you were aware of. Having access to the news and being across topics is, still an amazing thing because it brings issues to light. It brings awareness. But at the same time, we're just not wired to take on the problems of 8 billion people on a 24/7 news cycle. Now, there's research in cognitive psychology that suggests that our brains have a limited capacity for processing information and emotional content, which evolved when we were living in much smaller, less interconnected communities. Historically, now we dealt with immediate local concerns, not global or abstract ones. If I was in a tribe, all I needed to worry about was my tribe, my family, myself as well. So it was much smaller. And now all of a sudden we've expanded that to the entire world, which is again great, but it's a lot of change. The modern phenomenon of a 24/7 news cycle, I believe, bombards us with a volume and intensity of information that is unprecedented. So, what are some of the reasons? Why does it seem like when you consume negative information, you just can't seem to stop? Or what draws us to negative information in the first place? Now, understanding how we process and interpret the world is a hugely complex topic that I feel extremely unqualified to speak about. But I'm going to talk about it and draw upon some research that I found and what I found interesting as well. And again, all of the references will be included in the show notes, as well as the accompanying Instagram post. If you're not following already, it's at The Modern Maze, just all one word. So there are numerous factors all the way from psychology, neuroscience, and sociology that have an effect on what we pay attention to and how we process and interpret the world. And this includes things such as emotions, cultural backgrounds, education, memories, social environments. So why does it seem like we can't look away from bad news and we're intrigued by it? One of the reasons that has been studied and researched and proposed is in our cognitive biases, specifically our negativity bias, but I'll get to that in a moment. A cognitive bias Think of it like a shortcut that your brain takes when processing information. And it leads to some little errors in how you understand the world and make decisions. These biases operate below our level of awareness, and it influences our perceptions and judgments without us realizing it. And this can have an effect on everything from our daily choices to how we form opinions about what's happening around us. Essentially, cognitive biases shape our world, and they shape our view of the world by filtering the information we pay attention to and how we interpret it. Some examples include the anchoring bias. So people tend to rely heavily upon the first piece of news they receive to make subsequent judgments. And the status quo bias, which is the preference to keep things the same or maintain a previous decision. I want to talk about negativity bias because this is the one that has been linked to doom scrolling and consuming negative media. There is plenty of evidence to demonstrate that humans use negative information to pay attention and learn from more than positive information. What's the benefit of that? Like, why would our brain have this bias? Well, the main proposed benefit is evolutionary adaptiveness. So it is suggested to be beneficial for us and for our evolution and survival as a species because it helps us to quickly respond to threats and harmful stimuli, which historically increase survival. So imagine our ancestors heard a rustling in the bush. Those who assumed that it was a predator and reacted quickly were more likely to survive than those who assumed it was just the wind. And this helped them avoid danger, ensuring their survival and the continuation of their species. So it was really important for us to live in the world to be able to react to negative things quickly. And so therefore, there appears to be an evolutionary benefit to it. We also know that we learn faster and it's actually stronger from negative experiences. So negative reinforcements lead to quicker and more resilient learning compared to positive reinforcements. And this suggests that our brains are wired to respond more intensely to negative inputs. For example, if a child touches a hot stove and it burns their hand, the pain teaches them very quickly not to touch the stove again. This negative reinforcement is stronger and lasts longer in our memory than if their parents simply told them that the stove could be hot and not to touch it. It also appears that negative stimuli requires greater cognitive processing. So negative stimuli are perceived as more complex and demand more attention and cognitive resources. Negative information can also impact judgments and decision making more heavily than positive information. And this is evident in various psychological domains where negative traits or experiences have a stronger influence on our perceptions and memories. Finally, studies show that the brain has a distinct neural response to negative stimuli, often showing greater activity in our brain in response to negative rather than positive or neutral stimuli. And this could be due to the higher emotional and physical intensity that's typically associated with these negative feelings or negative outcomes. Example is when someone watches a scary movie, the brain's response is to increase your heart rate. Your palms are sweaty, you're sweating. It's typically more intense compared to watching a happy or neutral film. The intense reaction is our brain's way of preparing the body to handle potential threats, showing greater neural activity in response to the negative stimuli of the movie. So it appears that the negativity bias has a great hold on us, and that we are more likely to respond quicker and give more attention to negative things rather than positive ones. Because I guess from just a species and evolution point of view, is that if we are here to reproduce and continue the survival of our species and our bloodlines, then we need to be able to respond to things that are going to endanger us. Some other biases that have been suggested to have an influence on how we consume media is the availability bias, which is when people believe something is more likely to happen based on how easily they can remember it. And the illusory truth effect, which is when people believe something to be more true based on how often they hear it. So it seems like, again, negative imagery or language or words seem to have more of a hold on us. And this directly correlates with the news, because there are studies, and I'm going to talk about one now, that talks about the fact that news headlines that contain negative language are significantly more likely to be engaged with. There is a newsroom phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. This speaks to the intuition amongst journalists that bad news sells more newspapers than stories about good news. A study of around 105,000 different variations of news stories from a news site found that negative words in news headlines increase consumption rates, and positive words decrease consumption rates. So if there's negative words in the headline, people are more likely to consume more of the media. And if there's positive words, the opposite effect happens. And these results provide empirical evidence for a negativity bias. And the researchers link it to negative information as being perceived as more critical, and that it triggers a faster and more automatic response. And another study also demonstrated that the same effect can be seen on social media, which doesn't surprise me at all. So, if there are things in us that make us more susceptible or make us want to consume negative media, or we're built for that, to pay more attention to negative news, negative things, and the media and news knows that news headlines that contain this negative language are more likely for you and me to engage with, the next step is that news and online media then promote more negative stories. Because if negative language is more likely to be engaged with, then media companies which operate in a highly competitive digital landscape, they rely on advertising revenue, and that's often tied to metrics like click-through rates and viewer engagement. So negative headlines, which are statistically proven to draw more attention, become the right choice and the strategic choice for them to boost those metrics. The economic necessity shapes the content strategy of news outlets, and it perpetuates a cycle where negativity is emphasized because it's more profitable, instead of nurturing human values like compassion, empathy, or keeping people informed. Right? I mean, keeping people informed is still part of it, but if they're relying on advertising money and they know what type of news is meant to make you more likely to engage with, then I don't think it's a secret as to what they're going to choose. Similar thing with social media companies. With the algorithms, they work specifically on engagement. And so therefore, the more engaged material is going to be the one to get promoted. And that just means dollar bills for engagement and retention of viewers and people consuming media. So what does all of this mean? I guess the point that I'm trying to make here and try and bring out is that negative news is something that we're more predispositioned to engage with. And therefore, because of that, it gets pushed onto us more. And speaking for myself, when I go through these doom scrolling episodes, I feel anxious, I feel scared about the future, I feel worried and untrustworthy that humans can get their bloody heads together and we can all fight for collective change. And I'd like to ask you, how does it make you feel when you doom scroll, if you do doom scroll? And something that I was talking about with a mate at the gym today was, we've moved on from COVID being the main part of our lives, but I wonder sometimes if we're really cognizant of the changes that happened to us during those vicious news cycles back then. Like, I can notice a change in myself from before COVID and after COVID. Like, I was in Melbourne and I was bombarded with stress nonstop. Every day I was looking at the news, I was looking at case numbers, we were in lockdown. And I felt like my media consumption habits and honestly, even my phone addiction habits, social media addiction habits all changed. And I've been sort of battling with that ever since and trying to change my ways, change my habits. And so that was a question that I had, like, are we really aware of what has changed within us, if anything has changed within us from before COVID and after COVID? And if we've moved on and there's no effects, that's fine. But I mean, we're seeing a significant increase in mental health issues. It's shown, and there was a big review conducted last year, and there's always these studies going on, that there are significant increases in depression and anxiety compared to pre-pandemic levels. And there isn't really a doubt in my mind that this is a contributing factor to how we all consume news and social media habits. And there are big questions that we need to tackle together as a community about mental health. Now, again, while I think we should always strive to be informed and shine a light on the darkness in the world, I believe that being mindful about how we consume media and news potentially is a useful thing to know as we navigate these times with the constant news cycle. So what are some of the ways that we can break out of this cycle? Or when we're doom scrolling or we're feeling anxious, what are some of the tools and methods that we can use? The first one is mindfulness practices. So things like mindfulness and daily reflections can help you feel more grateful, can foster a more balanced perspective of the world, and can help us detach from the emotional pull of, the news. And I started gratitude journaling back in COVID, actually, during lockdowns. And then for a long time after that, I was doing it. And it really helped reshape how I saw the day. So things like that can help us get out of that frame of mind, that anxious frame of mind, if we're struggling with that. I uploaded a meditation last week. Sorry, not a meditation, a breathing exercise called it's a box breathing exercise, and it's on my Instagram. And breathing exercises like that is something that I found really helpful to bring me back to the present. And I actually just used it today. I'm not going to go into what I was looking into, but yeah, I found myself doom scrolling, and I was like, oh, you know what? You're doing an episode about it. Why don't you do your box breathing and see what happens? And I did it, and I'm not just saying this. I mean, I have nothing to gain from promoting my reel. It helped me. It really helped me just come back to myself, and I felt the tension melt away from my body, and I was able to take a step away from that state that I was putting myself in. And I actually was thinking about it this happened just before, like a couple of hours ago. I got back and I had this moment, and I was thinking of it like a pressure cooker. Like, you're consuming this media and you're doom scrolling, and it's almost like this pressure is building up inside you. At least that's how I was feeling. And when I did the breathing exercise, it was like I released the valve of it and all the steam was coming out. Like, I felt my body just drop, shoulders relaxed. So yeah, I found it really helpful today. So I'd love to know, if you guys do feel the need to do it and you do end up doing a breathing technique, how it made you feel, or if you found it helpful. If you didn't, I'd love to know how you deal with this as well, because I'd love to learn more ways about how to pull myself out of those moments. The second way that I think we can break out of the doom scroll is to consume more good stories. So I believe it's so important to promote all of the amazing things going on right now and to shine a light on it and to celebrate those people and celebrate the amazing things going on, because there is a lot of them. And so that's what the rest of this podcast is going to be. It's going to be 4 great news stories to brighten up your day. This was supposed to be an Instagram series only, but as I discussed at the start of this episode, I thought it was worth having a full episode about it. And if you guys enjoyed this and you want to learn and I want to learn more about negative news and how to break out of it, as well as some good news stories, I'm happy to continue this series, and I haven't decided if I will yet. So we'll see how we go. The last point I want to make before we jump into the good news stories is that if you are struggling mentally, or you're feeling like you're in a bit of a dark place and you want to talk to someone about it, please reach out to somebody. I will link some hotlines you can call and some resources. Please don't feel afraid to reach out to me as well. I consider you a friend. And just know that I'm here for you. You have a community, you have resources, and you're not in it alone. So please look after yourself. If you're feeling it and you're feeling the pressure of the world, and please reach out to those near you. Okay, let's jump into some good news stories and let's brighten up our days. Our first story is that the European Court of Human Rights supports Swiss women in a climate case. In 2024, we have already seen a huge rise in climate cases that are happening in front of international courts and tribunals. More and more people and communities are seeking legal action from governments and companies that are responsible for the destructive impacts of the climate crisis. This story is amazing. 2,500 elderly Swiss women with an average age of 73 in Switzerland, they formed an association to take their state to court for doing too little to prevent the impact of the climate crisis on their human rights. The group says that Switzerland has been failing and that their policies are inadequate for helping keep global warming below the Paris Agreement limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius. After exhausting all of their national options, including being defeated in the Swiss Federal Court, they took their case to the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that Switzerland is pursuing an inadequate climate policy and therefore is violating their human rights. In a historic decision, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the Swiss government's lack of action on climate change violates fundamental human rights. Specifically, it infringes on the right to respect for a private and family life and the right to a fair trial. There were 2 other cases presented to this court as well, one from France and one from Portugal. However, they were dismissed, And look, regardless of the other two being dismissed, it's still a great accomplishment getting these cases to Europe's highest courts. It's a huge success, and we need to celebrate it. And the case with the Swiss women, like average age of 73 years old, like I love that. I feel like so often I see young people try to bring on this action to courts and their governments, but yeah, something about these old women, these matriarchs, just standing up for themselves and their people and the world is so beautiful to me, and it's a really, really historic decision, and one that's going to be followed by a lot more cases around the world. Expect to see more of this as people look to the neglect of their governments in their collective inaction against climate change. Now, while courts in other countries are not bound by decisions of this European Court of Human Rights, they can still use these cases as precedents. And this is the rule that a legal principle that has been established by a superior court should be followed in other cases by that court and other courts, so it can be used to influence future decisions. 6 other climate changes by this court will now be considered in light of the Swiss case being one. So this includes cases where the people are from Austria, Germany, Italy, and Norway. And so it's an important time where governments are beginning to be held accountable by its people for not doing everything they can to achieve climate change mitigation targets. Beautiful, beautiful. Good start. Second good news story is that the Australasian bittern, which is an endangered Australian bird, has been heard for the first time in 40 years. This bird is nicknamed the bunyip bird for its eerie call, which has been said to resemble that of a bunyip, and this is a mythical creature that is said to inhabit swamps and waterholes. The sound of this bird has been heard for the first time in 40 years at Tasmania's Lagoon of Islands. And let me play you a soundbite of this bird's call. It's pretty incredible. It sounds like a dinosaur. The Lagoon of Islands was damaged by damming in 1964, but has been undergoing restoration since 2012. The removal of the dam has allowed vegetation to recover significantly, with about 90% of its cover restored, and wildlife such as the Australasian bittern returned. Its sounds was detected twice, and the doctor who has listened and recorded to the bittern has said that the call can carry 500 to 1,000 meters. It's a long ass call. That is a long distance for a mating call. Yep, gotta respect the game. Our third story is that Greece has become the first country in Europe to ban bottom trawling in marine protected areas. So by 2030, Greece is going to ban this damaging fishing practice to their protected areas. It's going to be banned in Greece's 3 national marine parks, one which is the largest in the East Mediterranean Sea. And they're aiming for 2026, with the rest following before the end of the decade. Bottom trawling is a fishing technique where they drag heavy fishing nets across the ocean floor, which can destroy habitats and even release carbon into the ocean and atmosphere. While there are restrictions in place throughout Europe, this is the first outright ban in all of one country's marine protected areas. The ocean floor is actually the world's largest carbon storehouse, and leaving the seabed undisturbed is critical for global efforts to curb the climate crisis. They also announced a huge number of pledges to tackle and monitor marine pollution, and they're also going to create 2 new marine parks, one of which safeguards important mammals such as sperm whales, beaked whales, dolphins, and monk seals. So an amazing thing to happen, end these damaging fishing practices in such a large area, I think is amazing. So good stuff, Greece. Well done. And our fourth story is, can soundscapes save coral reefs? Coral reefs are one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. They are multifunctional natural habitats that allow marine species to forage, escape from predators, and reproduce. And as you would know by now, they're under massive threat from a lot of environmental stresses. And one of them is actually noise pollution. And a recent study has shown the possibility of restoring coral reefs by playing a certain combination of sounds in the proximity of a reef. A soundscape refers to a sound or a combination of sounds that forms an acoustic environment. Underwater soundscapes are often overlooked because human ears are not adapted to these environments, but marine animals are highly dependent on sound cues for navigation, communication, and predator avoidance. And human-made noise pollution, such as from maritime transportation, offshore construction, and fishing, and even military sonar detection, damages marine communities, including physical damage, behavior alteration, and physiological change. Healthy coral reefs are naturally noisy, where there's multiple animals like snapping shrimp, there's fishes, and there's also breaking waves on the coral that create a soundscape. Back in 2010, a study recognized that the larval corals are phonotaxis, which means that they move in response to a sound. These larvae are attracted to the natural reef sounds generated by other resident marine organisms, such as fish and crustaceans. So the baby coral, the larvae, is attracted to noises, these soundscapes, which is that's the cutest thing ever. Like they're just searching for the sound vibrations, just bopping around. It's just adorable and amazing. I never knew this. This is incredible. At least I'm finding it interesting. I hope you are as well. And so in 2024, a study conducted by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, that was a mouthful, which is the largest independent research institution in the US for oceanographic research, demonstrated the potential of coral reef restoration via acoustic enrichment. So these scientists installed underwater speakers to shape a soundscape which sounded like a healthy reef to encourage the coral larval settlement to grow. What they found was that settlement rates can be up to 7 times higher under this acoustic enrichment, which potentially enhances the chance of coral larvae survival. This is amazing, up to 7 times higher. So they're playing this soundscape that sounds like a natural coral, sounds like how the ocean should sound. And these larvae are responding to it. Like, it's amazing. Who thought of this? Like, humans come up with some wild things, and this is one of them. Like, I find it so cute that a human was like, let's just play some sounds and see what happens. And I'm just imagining a scene from like Finding Nemo where some tunes just come on, and yeah, this is amazing. And while this is a promising start, the scientists call out that more research is needed to understand the long-term survival and growth. But it's looking like this could be a tool in restoring coral reefs, and just one part of the puzzle, right? There's many other things that need to happen. Well, this is interesting and a cool little invention or finding. A study in 2019, which was conducted at a degraded coral reef, at the Great Barrier Reef has also shown noticeable improvement in the fish community by playing healthy reef sound. With a 40-day acoustic treatment period, a visual survey conducted on the fish community found a 50% increase in the damselfish community, which is one of the most common reef fish species in the Great Barrier Reef, and an overall increase of 5 other schools of fish within the food web, which demonstrates that there is an enrichment result in fish communities. So it can potentially, and seems to be, helping fish communities as well as the coral communities. So lots of potential here, and just a cute invention in my opinion, which I love. But that is all of our good news stories for today. I hope that it brought a little bit of a smile to your face. There is a lot of incredible things going on, and I think we covered a good range of topics, from court cases to animals returning to fishing practices being banned, some more regulatory and rules-based, and then cool little scientific invention going on right now. But I hope that today's episode gave you some tools and knowledge to help us in this fight against doom scrolling and negative news. And this is something that I do want to continue exploring. So yeah, let me know if you have any reflections or thoughts. I'll be really curious to hear how other people deal with the negative news and what are your reflections on that. But that's all from me today. I hope that you guys have a beautiful day. Look after yourselves as always, and I will speak to you soon. Namaste.